A man may have founded Russia. We cannot prove he existed. For 700 years, it did not matter. In 862, a collection of warring tribes sent a message across the Baltic Sea. They had tried to govern themselves. They had failed. Blood feuds had replaced law. Towns they built had burned. So they did the one thing most civilizations consider unthinkable. They asked a foreigner to come and rule them. The man who answered was named Rurik. But here is the problem historians have never fully solved. Somewhere in the records of 8th century Europe, there is another man, same name, same background, same era, operating on the other side of the continent. One of them may be a ghost, both of them may be the same person, and the dynasty that descended from whichever one actually stood in Novgorod in 862 would rule Russia for 7 unbroken centuries. This is the story of Rurik, as much of it as survives. To understand where he came from, you have to understand what the Rus were. Most historians trace their origins to the coastal regions of what is now eastern Sweden, specifically to Roslagen, the historic Swedish coastal district from which these seafarers launched south and east. The name Rus likely derives from an Old Norse term connected to rowing, men who row, which tells you everything about how they moved and how they thought about power. They were not an ethnic group. They were a function. Varangian, the broader term for Norsemen who had crossed into the Eastern world, meant in practice men who had sworn an oath and gone abroad to make something of themselves. They followed the rivers, the Volga, the Dnieper, the great liquid roads that connected the Baltic to Byzantium. By the mid-8th century, they were everywhere the rivers went. Traders, raiders, mercenaries, rulers when the opportunity presented itself. The opportunity was about to present itself. Before Rurik appears in Eastern sources, a man with a near-identical name is making enemies across Western Europe. Rurik of Dorestad. He belongs to a rival branch of the emerging Danish royal house, possibly a nephew of King Harald Klak, and the Carolingian Emperor Louis the Pious has made the calculated mistake of granting him Frisian lands as a political arrangement. Rurik takes the arrangement seriously, too seriously. In 850, he seizes the trading port of Dorestad. In 857, he attacks Hedeby. In 859, he sacks Bremen. He is exactly the kind of Varangian that made Frankish administrators wake up at night, unpredictable, mobile, and impossible to permanently contain. Then, in 860, the emperor strips him of his lands. Rurik of Dorestad vanishes from Western records. Not dead, not captured, just gone. In the same years, 862 in Eastern sources, a Varangian leader named Rurik appears in the Eastern Baltic, establishes a stronghold at Ladoga, and moves his seat of power to Novgorod. The name Rurik is the Slavic form of the Old Norse Hroerik, the same root that produces Rurik in the West. The same name, translated twice, landing in 2 different record systems separated by the width of a continent. When Frankish records pick him up again in 870, Charles the Bald restores his Frisian territories. By 882, a Frankish source notes him as deceased, no precise date given. The primary chronicle places the death of Rurik of Novgorod in 879, 3 years before the final Western reference to his possible counterpart. The timelines do not collide, they rhyme. 2 centuries of scholarship have not resolved this. The most honest answer is that we do not know whether these were two men running parallel careers under the same name, or one man who lost his position in the West and rebuilt himself in the East. What the question reveals, regardless of the answer, is the scale of the world these men moved through. A world where a single Varangian warlord could be politically significant in both Francia and the eastern forests. The same Norse name could echo from the Rhine to the Volga. The account of what happened in 862 survives in two sources that agree on the shape of events while differing on the texture. The primary chronicle, written in Kiev approximately 2.5 centuries after the events it describes, by Kievan monks with an interest in a specific founding narrative, records the invitation plainly. The tribe said, "Our land is vast and rich, but there is no order in it. Come and rule over us." The Novgorod First Chronicle, the oldest surviving chronicle of the Rus from the Novgorod Republic, fills in what came before. These tribes had previously expelled their Varangian rulers. They tried self-governance, they founded towns, then they turned on each other. Fighting broke out everywhere. Disorder spread from city to city. No justice among them. That context changes the story. This was not a naive people who had never encountered power. This was a people who had tried to hold power themselves, watched it rot into blood feud, and made the grimly practical decision they needed someone from outside. Rurik came with two brothers, Cineas and Truvor. Cineas settled at Bielozor. Truvor took Izborsk. Rurik ruled Novgorod. 2 years later, both brothers were dead, and Rurik held everything. Those brothers may never have existed. Several scholars have argued that Cineas and Truvor are mistranslations, that an earlier source written in Old Norse described Rurik arriving sine hus with his household and Truvering with his faithful Varangians. Two phrases. A later Slavic scribe, working from a document he could not fully read, interpreted them as proper names, wrote two brothers into the chronicle, gave Rurik a family he may never have had. If that reading is correct, Rurik did not share power. He arrived alone, with his retinue, and the record system of a later age dressed it in the language of brotherhood. Real brothers or translated ghosts, the outcome is the same. One man in Novgorod, one authority, and a land that had been tearing itself apart went quiet. He ruled for 17 years. What those years actually looked like, how he administered, how he taxed, how he kept the loyalty of men who had called him in across a sea, the sources do not say. The primary chronicle was written to record a founding, not a governance. Rurik, the administrator, is invisible. Rurik, the origin point, is permanent. What we can infer is that he understood what he was sitting on. Novgorod controlled the northern gateway of the river route connecting the Baltic to the Black Sea, the path from the Varangians to the Greeks, as later sources would call it. Whoever held Novgorod held the toll gate of a continental trading system. Rurik held it, and he held it without fracture. He died in 879. No named wound, no recorded illness, no final battle. For a man who may have spent decades operating at the violent edge of two civilizations, the silence at the end is its own statement. His son, Igor, was a child, too young to rule. So Rurik did the thing that separates founders from dynasty builders. He arranged for continuity. He entrusted the realm and the boy with his kinsman, Oleg, with instructions to hold both until Igor was ready. Oleg held both. In 882, he pushed south, seized Kiev, and declared it the new political heart of the Rus world. He did not take the throne for himself. He kept Igor alive and kept the line intact. That act of restraint, choosing to pass power down rather than claiming it sideways, was as consequential as any military victory. It meant the dynasty survived its most dangerous moment, the second generation. What came after is one of the longest dynastic arcs in European history. Not the smoothest, not the most stable, but the longest. Igor ruled after Oleg. His son Sviatoslav cut south and east with extraordinary force. He destroyed the Khazar Khaganate, the great steppe power that had dominated the region for generations, and drove as far as Bulgaria before his enemies pulled him back. Then came Vladimir the Great, who in 988 made the decision that would define Russia's civilizational identity for 1,000 years. He converted to Orthodox Christianity and imposed that faith across the Rus lands, binding his realm to Byzantium in ways that would outlast both empires. Vladimir's son Yaroslav, called the Wise, brought the Kievan Rus to its height. He built the Cathedral of St. Sophia in Kiev. He established legal codes. He arranged dynastic marriages with the royal houses of France, Norway, Hungary, and England. Under Yaroslav, the Rurikids were not a regional power. They were a dynasty that the kings of Europe considered worth marrying into. Then the realm fragmented. The Rurikid princes split the inheritance across competing principalities, each branch fighting the others for precedence, the dynasty simultaneously holding the world together and pulling it apart. And then the Mongols came. In 1237, Batu Khan crossed the Volga. City after city fell, not conquered and garrisoned, but burned to the foundation. Kiev itself was sacked in 1240. Entire regions were depopulated. The Rurikid princes who survived did so by learning to operate inside the power of the Mongols rather than against it, riding to the Golden Horde to receive their patents of authority, paying tribute, finding ways to remain useful to an overlord who could erase them without ceremony. The dynasty absorbed that too. The princes of Moscow, a minor Rurikid branch that had seemed entirely unremarkable before the conquest, accumulated power steadily through the 13th and 15th centuries. In 1480, Ivan III ended the formal submission to the Golden Horde. In 1547, Ivan IV, the Terrible, declared himself Tsar, a Slavic rendering of Caesar, and positioned Moscow as the heir to both the Rus and to Rome itself, the Third Rome, the final empire. The dynasty Rurik, founded in a northern trading post in 862, was now claiming universal imperial authority. It closed in 1598. Fyodor I, quiet, deeply pious, entirely unsuited for power, died without an heir. He was the last Tsar of the Rurikid line. From Rurik's death in 879 to Fyodor's in 1598, 719 years, 21 generations in unbroken male line descent, a span that outlasted the Mongol Empire, 2 iterations of the Roman legacy, and every royal house in Western Europe. History cannot agree on who Rurik was. It cannot confirm whether he was the Viking warlord that disappeared from Frankish records and rebuilt himself on the other side of the world. It cannot confirm whether his brothers were men or phrases. It cannot even confirm with complete certainty that he was not a figure assembled backwards from a dynasty that needed a founder. What history cannot do is ignore him. Because whatever stood in Novgorod in 862, one man, one myth, or something in between, it held. It passed to the next generation and the generation after that. For 7 centuries, rulers of the largest country on earth traced their right to rule back to a Varangian chieftain who arrived by invitation. You cannot argue with 7 centuries. This has been Sinister Archive. I'm Ollie. We'll see you in the dark.